Donald Trump stated that he can do whatever he wants with Cuba and called on the people of Cuba to get rid of their communist president. Immediately after the Cuban Ministry of Energy officially announced a complete, total blackout across the entire island. Cuba was plunged into complete darkness because none of the power plants are working anymore. As a result, 10 million people were left without electricity and therefore without other utilities as well. The electricity generation and transmission system in Cuba is extremely worn out and had failures before, but now these problems are compounded by a lack of fuel for the power plants. After the United States seized Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, which is friendly to Cuba, in early January, the supply of oil and petroleum products to Cuba virtually stopped. Now Donald Trump publicly, without hesitation, claims that he can do whatever he wants with Cuba, and that the Cuban authorities are asking to make a deal with him. As a result, the United States openly stated that Cubans should overthrow their communist president in order to restore electricity and normal life on the island. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and leave any comment under this episode. In addition, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link is in the description of this video, where we post breaking news as it comes in. So, in Cuba, against which Donald Trump effectively imposed an oil blockade, there was a total blackout on Monday. Electricity went out across the entire island, which has a population of about 10 million people. The Cuban power grid operator said that the specific reasons for the outage are allegedly still being investigated. But the essence of the problem is obvious: the system of electricity generation and transmission. In Cuba, it is extremely worn out. It had failures before, but now these problems are compounded by a lack of fuel for the power plants. Because since January, the US has blocked any oil flows to the island, and without oil and petroleum products, electricity production on the island is impossible. And experts warn that the communist regime on the island had at most a month before disaster struck. Cuba held out a little longer, but the result is obvious in the end. After the US captured the leader of Cuba-friendly Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, in early January, oil and petroleum product supplies to Cuba virtually stopped. As a result, hours-long power outages have become the norm in different parts of the island. In early March, the first complete blackout caused by a breakdown at the country's main power plant covered 2/3 of the island, but it turned out that this was not the worst yet. Officially, since the beginning of this year, Cuban ports have received only 2 small fuel ships. You might think maybe the Russians helped? No, not so fast. 1 oil tanker arrived in Havana from Mexico in January. The second one was carrying liquefied petroleum gas. That's the kind of gas usually used to fill cylinders for gas stoves. You've seen those red cylinders. So, the ship carrying this gas arrived from Jamaica in February. After that, Trump made it clear that it would be better not to supply it, otherwise both Mexico and Jamaica would face heavy tariffs. By the way, Russia loudly promised to help Cuba, but in reality they didn't even send a humanitarian shipment. Nothing came from Venezuela, which used to be the main fuel supplier to Cuba. Although the Venezuelan state company loaded a tanker with gasoline in February, which used to regularly deliver fuel to Cuba. But it still hasn't left Venezuelan territorial waters. Due to power outages, as well as shortages of food and medicine, protests have started in Cuba. On March 14, an extremely rare event occurred on the island. Protesters set fire to the building of the ruling Communist Party committee in the city of Moron. And this was, so to speak, the first nail in the coffin of the regime. It is reported that in the evenings people go out in the dark for the traditional Latin American marches of empty pots. People come out, bang on pots and pans, and chant the word freedom. President Miguel Díaz-Canel of Cuba, on March 14, the day the Communist Party committee was set on fire, stated that he understands the citizens' dissatisfaction with the long power outages, but of course blamed everything on the Americans. He said Cuba's regime isn't at fault, the USA is to blame. Although earlier, on March 12, Díaz-Canel confirmed a report by the American press that Havana was indeed holding direct talks with Washington, although he said almost nothing about their content. The American press previously reported that these secret negotiations were led by Raúl Guillermo Rodríguez Castro, the grandson of former Cuban President Raúl Castro, and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, whose parents, I remind you, came to the U.S. from Cuba. On the same day, Havana announced that as a result of negotiations with the Vatican, as a gesture of goodwill, they released 51 foreign citizens. Well, in other words, they tried to show that they are supposedly reasonable negotiators. At the same time, US President Donald Trump began threatening Cuba, stating that it was next after Venezuela and Iran on his list of countries in need of a change of leadership. On Sunday, Trump said that Cuba wants to make a deal, and then he said, quote, "I think very soon, after the war with Iran is over, we will either make a deal with Cuba or we will do what we need to do." But on the day when the power went out in Cuba, Trump started using harsher rhetoric. Trump said that he can now do whatever he wants with Cuba. As a result, the New York Times writes that the US openly wants to change the president of Cuba, but allow it to keep its regime. According to some officials in Donald Trump's administration, removing the head of the Cuban state would pave the way for structural economic reforms that the current president, Miguel Díaz-Canel, does not support for ideological reasons. This approach aligns with the White House's view that it's better not to completely change or overthrow hostile regimes, but to achieve their compliance, as was accomplished in the case of Venezuela. And one of the sources in the White House said that removing the president of Cuba would be a symbolic victory for Trump, allowing him to claim that he had overthrown the leader of a communist country. A government that has been opposing the United States of America for more than 65 years, but the regime itself could basically be left in place. Trump already stated on Monday that it would be an honor for him to seize Cuba in one form or another. Whether I liberate it or seize it, I think I can do whatever I want with it, to be honest. Right now, it's a very weakened country. But if you take away all the populism, the main goal of American officials is for Cuba to gradually open its economy to American businessmen and companies, thus becoming a client state of the US. This will also allow Trump to announce several symbolic political victories. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support our YouTube channel financially with any donation, paid subscription, or sponsorship on YouTube. How to do this? All the links and details are in the description of this video or via the QR code on your screen. I will be grateful for any support you can give. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.